Have you ever wondered about the black wealth in China? While everyone's fixated on Shenzhen's tech billionaires and Shanghai's skyline, there's a hidden ecosystem of black families quietly building fortunes here, through footballers earning more than Fortune 500 CEOs tax-free, trading empires shipping 150 containers a month, and industrial deals with Chinese state giants worth billions. These are the richest black families whose fortunes run through China, and the stories run from a district they nicknamed Chocolate City all the way to the richest black man on the planet. Let's get into it. Number 6. Mustafa, Dieng, and the traders of Chocolate City. Let's start where the whole story actually begins, in a few square kilometers of Guangzhou that the locals nicknamed Chocolate City. Starting in the late 1990s, tens of thousands of African traders poured into two neighborhoods called Xiaobei and Sanyuanli, 3 metro stops apart, and built one of the most remarkable trading economies on Earth. Many of them came not directly from Africa, but from Southeast Asia, chased out by the 1997 financial crisis, and a striking number of them arrived with real education, roughly 40% holding university degrees from African universities, looking east because opportunity at home had dried up. The whole thing was anchored on 3 giant multi-story emporiums, the Tianshu, the Xiushan, and the Guolong, where Chinese factories displayed their goods to buyers from all over the world. And the model was beautifully simple. Buy unbranded products straight off the factory floor in the Pearl River Delta. Everything from fake Levi's to genuine high-end electronics. Stuff it into a shipping container, send it home, and sell it for a fortune, because nothing shipped from anywhere else on Earth could compete with Chinese factory prices. The margins were real. By 2015, a survey found that 1 in 5 traders in Little Africa was earning upward of $4,800 a month, more than most local Chinese workers made at the time, and some were reportedly clearing over $300,000 a year. The man who became the face of that world is Mustafa Dieng. Dieng is Senegalese, and in 2002 he was working as a trader in Bangkok when he flew to Guangzhou to attend the Canton Fair. He liked what he saw, and he stayed. He rented a 70-square-meter apartment, turned the living room into a showroom packed floor to ceiling with everything from garments to home appliances, and named his company Teranga, the Wolof word for Senegalese hospitality. By buying goods for his clients at prices they could never get themselves, he built a genuine empire. Between 2006 and 2010, Teranga was shipping an average of 150 containers a month from China to Senegal, each one carrying around $1 million yuan in merchandise, and he bought warehouses in both Guangzhou and Foshan to handle the volume. Here's a detail that tells you what this era was really like. Before cross-border banking reached these traders, merchants would fly into Guangzhou with hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash strapped to their bodies in specially made garments, just to pay the factories when they landed. No wire transfers, no apps, just cash, trust, and a plane ticket. And Dieng didn't stay a trader, which is the part that actually matters. When rising Chinese labor costs started squeezing the margins on cheap goods, he moved up the chain into heavy logistics, construction materials, and industrial machinery. Then he made the leap almost nobody makes. He visited a factory in Wuxi, in Jiangsu province, spotted a bottling and packaging production line, and instead of buying what it produced, he bought the entire line, shipped it across an ocean, and rebuilt it in Senegal to make his own products at home. That is the exact moment a trader becomes an industrialist, and he did it in a single decision. His children grew up in Guangdong fluent in Mandarin, Cantonese, French, and Wolof, and his eldest went to Tsinghua University, essentially the MIT of China. He became the elected leader of Guangzhou's Senegalese community, and a journalist once found him standing at his office window, looking out over Chocolate City, reminiscing that at its peak, you could stand right there and genuinely feel like you were back in Africa. That peak is gone now. Tighter visa rules, a COVID exodus, and rising Chinese labor costs have drained much of the life out of Little Africa. But the traders who came up in it, like Dieng, walked away with real fortunes and a blueprint that everyone after them would copy. Dieng built his empire by going to China. But he wasn't the only man running Chocolate City, because a few streets over, another trader had made himself something close to a head of state. Number 5. Ojukwu Emma, the president of Africa in China. Everybody in Little Africa just calls him the chairman. His full name is Ojukwu Emma, and he arrived in Guangzhou in 1997, right at the dawn of the whole phenomenon. He came as a trader like everyone else, but over the years he became something much bigger, the elected head of the entire Nigerian community in the city, and he gave himself a title that tells you exactly how much authority he wields: President of Africa in China. It's a bombastic name, and he's earned every syllable of it. Speaking of what separated Ojukwu Emma from thousands who arrived in Guangzhou the same way, a lot of it comes down to how the brain performs when it matters. That's the idea behind an audio series called the Genius Switch. It's based on the neuroscience of the flow state, that mode where focus and creativity click at the same time. And the whole routine is just listening with headphones a few minutes a day. It's a one-time $39, less than a single online course, and it's backed by a 90-day money-back guarantee, so you can test it on yourself with nothing to lose. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to what that influence looks like when things go badly wrong. Here's how you understand his actual power. There's a documented story, reported by NPR, of a Nigerian trader named Kelvin Njubigbo, who came to Guangzhou, made 2 profitable trips, and on his third was lured somewhere, grabbed from behind, had his legs smashed with a sledgehammer, and had a money belt holding his entire life savings, $19,000, torn off his body. When he limped into the police station, broken, the officer didn't have much to offer except a single phone number. It was the chairman's. In a community that runs largely on cash and outside the formal banking system, the man you call when everything falls apart isn't a bank or an embassy, it's Ojukwu Emma. And he turned that informal authority into something structural. In 2012, he founded the Nigerian Chinese Family Forum, an organization of around 200 mixed-race couples and their children. Because a whole generation of these traders had married Chinese women and started families, and those families needed a voice. His team assembled a formal dossier documenting the economic contribution Nigerians were making to Guangzhou and presented it to the Chinese Public Security Bureau, essentially lobbying the state for longer, more humane visas. A trader, acting as a diplomat, negotiating with the Chinese government on behalf of a community that officially barely exists. His own wealth is the classic Chocolate City story, a trading operation built on export to Nigeria, a Chinese wife, a son being raised across 2 cultures, and a base in the city stretching back nearly 3 decades. But his real fortune is influence. In a world of thousands of traders moving cash across borders with almost no institutional protection, the man who can settle a dispute, pull strings with the authorities, and command the room is worth more than any single container of goods. Ojukwu built his power inside Chocolate City. The next man got China to pay him more than almost any executive on earth, just to kick a ball there. Number 4. Cedric Bakambu and the Beijing Super Salary. In January 2018, a Chinese football club did something so financially insane that people still ask you to repeat the numbers. Beijing Guoan, backed by the state-adjacent financial giant CITIC Group, wanted to sign a striker named Cedric Bakambu from the Spanish club Villarreal. The transfer fee was 40 million euros. But at the time, the Chinese Football Association had slapped a 100% tax on foreign transfer fees to try to cool the spending, which meant Beijing Guoan's actual outlay to sign one player came to over $90 million. 90 million for a single footballer. Then they handed him the contract, and it paid him around 18 million euros a year. Tax-free, every year. Sit with what that means for a moment. Bakambu is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, a country where the average annual income is measured in hundreds of dollars, and here he was earning 18 million a year in the capital of China, more than the majority of Fortune 500 chief executives took home that same year. And unlike them, he paid no tax on a cent of it. He lived in Beijing's Chaoyang Embassy District in a secured luxury compound with private translators and custom transport, treated less like an athlete and more like a visiting head of state. To understand how this was even possible, you have to understand the moment. In the mid-2000s, the Chinese Super League went through something close to collective financial madness. State-backed conglomerates, ordered from the top to raise China's football profile and flush with capital, started throwing contracts at foreign stars that made European wages look quaint, and the transfer tax rule was Beijing's own attempt to slam the brakes on its own clubs. Bakambu arrived at the exact peak of that fever and locked in a deal at the very top of it. Over 4 years in Beijing, from 2018 to 2021, he earned close to $80 million in salary alone, which by most accounts makes him the single largest individual wealth accumulation story of any black athlete who has operated inside mainland China. But here's what lifts Bakambu above the usual athlete gets rich story. He didn't blow it, he deployed it into private equity, into real estate across Europe and Central Africa, and into the Cedric Bakambu Foundation, which funds education, healthcare, and technology programs back in the DRC. He treated a Chinese football contract not as a payday, but as the seed capital for everything that came next. Bakambu turned 2 years in Beijing into a fortune. Another African star did the same thing one city over in Shanghai and turned it into an entire conglomerate. Number 3. Asamoah Gyan and the Baby Jet Empire. The Chinese Super League in the mid-2000s went through what can only be described as a collective financial fever. State-backed conglomerates, flush with cash and hungry for prestige, started paying African and European stars salaries that made the Premier League look modest, and every contract was tax-free. Asamoah Gyan walked straight into the middle of that moment and squeezed it for everything it was worth. Gyan is a Ghanaian legend, arguably the greatest scorer in the history of the Africa Cup of Nations. In 2015, he signed with Shanghai SIPG, backed by the Shanghai International Port Group, for a reported £227,000 a week, tax-free. That is over $300,000 landing in his account every single week, which works out to well over $14 million a year from one contract. He lived in a penthouse in Shanghai's Lujiazui Financial District, one of the most expensive postcodes on Earth, with a private security detail and a fleet of cars. And like Bakambu, the interesting part isn't the salary, it's what he did with it. Under a corporate umbrella he named Baby Jet. After his famous goal celebration, Gyan funneled that Chinese money straight into building a business empire back home. Baby Jet Airlines, an industrial water bottling operation, a sports promotions company, real estate across West Africa, and the UK music production. He looked at a 2-year football contract and saw a launchpad. Most people in that position buy things that lose value. Gyan bought things that compound. Gyan and Bakambu both went to China and came home rich. The next two families never needed to move there at all because they built empires so large that China became their supplier. Number 2. The Masiyiwa family and the Econet network. Strive Masiyiwa is a Zimbabwean billionaire born in 1961 and one of the most quietly powerful business figures Africa has ever produced, with a net worth Forbes puts at around $1.5 billion. His origin story is pure stubbornness. In 1993, he tried to launch a mobile phone company in Zimbabwe, and his own government told him no. They fought him in the courts for 5 years while he nearly went bankrupt, and he simply refused to quit. He finally won in 1998 and launched Econet Wireless. That refusal to fold is the whole foundation of the fortune. Now here's where China comes in and why the family belongs on this list. When Econet went to build mobile networks across Africa's toughest markets, Western equipment suppliers were either too expensive or too slow to extend credit. Chinese firms ZTE and Huawei offered the gear on long-term credit backed by Chinese export insurance institutions, which meant Masiyiwa could roll out networks across multiple countries without writing enormous checks upfront. That financing model was the engine that let Econet scale faster than any Western-financed competitor could. Today, through Cassava Technologies, the family runs Africa's largest open-access cross-border fiber network, over 110,000 kilometers of cable, plus data centers, cloud services, and fintech platforms, much of it built in partnership with Chinese manufacturers and credit agencies. And the family runs its wealth and its giving as one operation. Through their Higher Life Foundation, Strive and his wife Sidsi have funded the education of hundreds of thousands of orphaned and vulnerable children across Africa, and he sits on the boards of the Gates and Rockefeller Foundations. And the lifestyle is deliberately understated for a man of that scale. The family's primary home is in London, and they run the commercial empire and the philanthropy as two halves of the same operation rather than one funding the other as an afterthought. Through the Higher Life Foundation, they've reportedly funded the education of over 250,000 orphaned and vulnerable children and poured $100 million into rural entrepreneurship in Zimbabwe alone. The Masiyiwa story isn't about living in Guangzhou. It's about understanding, earlier than almost anyone, that Chinese infrastructure financing was going to be the fuel for Africa's digital revolution and positioning the family to ride it before the rest of the world caught on. Masiyiwa used China to wire a continent. The family at number 1 used it to build the biggest thing on that continent and made China come to them. Number 1. The Dangote family and the China supply chain empire. And at number 1, it isn't close. Aliko Dangote is Nigeria's most famous billionaire, founder and chairman of the Dangote Group, the largest industrial conglomerate in West Africa, and the richest black man in the world, with a fortune Forbes has put north of $13 billion. And his connection to China isn't incidental, it's structural. Start with cement, because that's where it begins. Dangote Cement is the largest producer on the African continent, with annual production capacity north of 70 million metric tons across more than a dozen countries. And building that capacity required machinery and engineering at a scale only Chinese state-owned firms could deliver affordably and on credit. So Dangote signed a $4.3 billion deal with Sonoma International of China to build integrated cement plants across 11 African countries at once. Not one plant, 11, across an entire continent in a single agreement with a single Chinese firm. Then the trucks. The Dangote Group runs a fleet of over 12,000 commercial vehicles, and they come from Sinotruck, China's major heavy-duty manufacturer. The two set up a $100 million joint venture, Dangote Sinotruck West Africa, structured as 65% Dangote and 35% Sinotruck, to assemble trucks in Nigeria from components shipped straight off Chinese production lines, and it keeps going. In 2026, he signed an equipment deal with the Chinese machinery giant XCMG, aimed at nearly doubling his Lekki refinery's capacity from 650,000 barrels a day toward 1.3 million by 2029, which would make it the single largest crude oil refinery on the planet by processing capacity. And in October 2024, he signed a strategic cooperation agreement with China National Building Materials, one of the biggest construction materials conglomerates in the world. In a single recent stretch, Dangote signed billion-dollar deals with 4 separate Chinese state-adjacent giants. That's not a trade relationship, that's an industrial alliance at sovereign scale. And here's what makes his China story the opposite of everyone else's on this list. The traders went to China to buy, the footballers went to China to earn. Masiyiwa used China to finance. But Dangote made China come to him. The Chinese firms are the ones flying into Lagos. The Chinese engineering giants are the ones bidding to build his plants. His daughter Halima runs commercial operations for the group, positioning the next generation to inherit not just the fortune but the relationships. When you're the richest black man in the world building the biggest refinery on earth, you don't go to China. China comes to you. And there you have it. The richest black families whose fortunes run through China, from a Senegalese trader who turned a Guangzhou living room into a shipping empire, to footballers who out-earned Fortune 500 CEOs tax-free, to the richest black man alive signing billion-dollar deals with Chinese state giants 4 at a time. What ties them together isn't a postcode. It's that every one of them saw the same thing early, that the road to serious wealth in this century runs straight through China, and they each found a completely different way to get on it. So drop a comment and tell me which one surprised you the most, the trader, the footballers, or the man the Chinese giants fly to Lagos to do business with. Hit that like button and subscribe to Black Status, because we break down hidden empires exactly like these every single week.